Blending requirements are put in place to really help with air pollution, to keep our air cleaner with respect to what's coming out of the tailpipes of our cars. The clean air restrictions come from the Clean Air Act and the Clean Air Act Amendment of 1990, and there are kind of 5 different types of them. Some of them apply based on whether it's warm weather or cold weather, and some of them apply based on your geography. Some of them just apply all the time to everybody. And the first is the lead. No lead in gasoline. Back in the day, gasoline was put in lead was put in gasoline to keep your engine from knocking. Well, lead isn't really good for you, so from now on we have no lead in our gasoline. That applies all the time to everybody. Second up is detergents. Again, back in the day, gasoline used to have kind of some particles in it, some junk, and it would settle in your gas tank. Well, as you drew the gasoline down into your engine, that junk got into your engine. It wasn't very good for your engine. So now we have detergents in the gasoline, so that will keep your engine running better throughout its lifetime. The next regulation is something called Reid vapor pressure. And Reid vapor pressure is just a measure of the pollution that's coming out of the gasoline when it's going from the pump to your gas tank. It's evaporating, it's mixing with the air, and it can cause ground level ozone. The Reid vapor pressure says to the refineries, you have to refine that gasoline an additional step and get the lightest elements out of it, the butane and the benzene. And this really applies in the summer months or in areas where it's always warm. The fourth requirement is about oxygenation. And that kind of is what it sounds like. You add oxygen to the gasoline. And what this does is it helps the gasoline burn better, more energy in the engine, less junk coming out the tailpipe. It's the cold weather blend, because in cold weather, your engine starting cold has a tendency to burn, to put off more carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide isn't good for you. The thing about this oxygenation requirement is that the government actually lifted it. The government said you didn't have to oxygenate gasoline anymore. But the weird thing is that you do, because the last requirement, RFG, reformulated gasoline, is a combination of all the other requirements, oxygenation, Reid vapor pressure, detergents, and no lead, plus emission standards. RFG was intended not for the entire country, but it was intended just for really polluted areas like Gary, Indiana, and Chicago. I think they're called severe non-attainment ozone areas. But the key thing to keep in mind, though, is that any region could opt in to that RFG gasoline if they wanted to. And Louisville has done just that. Now, how do blending requirements increase the cost of gas? A bunch of different ways. First of all, the additives are more expensive than the gasoline. If you take 2 items, you mix them together, one is more expensive than the other item, it makes the other item more expensive. Second, it costs more to refine some of these blends, especially if you're talking about California. California has the most strict requirements in the country. Sometimes you need additional equipment to refine the gasoline ultimately to get to that blend. But what really makes the blends, how they make gasoline more expensive, is because something called non-substitutability. It divides the oil market of the United States. Instead of just one big gas market, it's dozens, because everybody has a different requirement. And if you're making a blend over here, it can't be sold over there. If there's a supply crunch over here, oops, can't help you. That is where the blends really cause a lot of supply shocks, demand shocks, the price goes up. And if we're talking about blending requirements, we need to talk about ethanol. Ethanol, until recently, was one of the 2 ways you oxygenated gasoline. Not anymore. Ethanol is really the main way to oxygenate gasoline. Also, recently, ethanol has jacked up the price of gas because there's been a huge surge of demand. Why did that surge of demand happen? The Energy Policy Act of 2005 did a couple of things. It said any government vehicle that was a dual-use vehicle, it could use conventional gasoline or alternative fuels, had to use alternative fuels. Second, Congress said, we're not going to make you do the oxygenate thing anymore. That had kind of a ripple effect, because remember, I talked about that MBTE. MBTE really was the additive of choice because it was much cheaper to make than ethanol. But MBTE has been linked with groundwater contamination. Okay, well, when you have that kind of pollution, that kind of contamination that can affect people, the sharks, I mean the lawyers, started circling. Well, the main defense of the refiners was, hey, the government made me do it. It was a government requirement. The government said, no, you don't have to add MBT anymore. This left the refiners vulnerable to lawsuits. They ran away from MBTE as fast as they could. Where did they go? To ethanol. There was a huge surge in demand. We didn't have the supply. The price went up. And also what the Energy Policy Act of 2005 did is it dramatically increased the amount of ethanol we have to add to our fuel supply. 12 billion gallons of ethanol, or its cousin, biodiesel, have to be added to the fuel supply annually by the year 2012. Again, demand goes up, supply wasn't there, the price of ethanol went up, that increased the price of gasoline.